Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us today because we are tackling something huge. We're unpacking a densely packed, hour-long interview with conservative commentator and historian Victor Davis Hanson. Now, Hanson has a very distinct, sweeping perspective on American society. And honestly, trying to digest his entire worldview all at once can kind of feel like drinking from a fire hose. But don't worry, that is exactly what we're here to do. We're going to impartially break down his wide-ranging thoughts and map out his logic step by step. So let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of it all, we've synthesized his analysis into 5 easy-to-follow thematic pillars: America's political realignment, the modern Jacobin left, shifting cultural norms, a look at foreign policy, and finally, the state of academia.
Starting us off with Pillar 1, America's political realignment, specifically focusing on changing maps and demographics.
For Hanson, the whole conversation about domestic politics starts from a purely structural standpoint. Just listen to the sheer scale of the numbers he brings to the table. He points to a massive state exodus, specifically noting that over 300,000 residents are packing up and leaving Los Angeles every single year, and taking their voting power straight to red states. Add to that the demographic impact of 53 million foreign-born residents in the U.S. He argues this creates entirely new political constituencies that require trillions in social support. And finally, there's gerrymandering. He claims that if districts were drawn proportionally, in a totally racially blind manner, Republicans are actually vastly underrepresented and would net about 16 to 17 new seats in the House of Representatives.
Now, according to Hanson's worldview, these demographic realities absolutely terrify the political left. So how do they respond? Well, he asserts that progressives know their agenda isn't naturally retaining voters, so they're planning sweeping structural counter-strategies to maintain their grip on power. Hanson alleges this strategy includes packing the Supreme Court with new justices, adding Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico as states to secure more Senate seats, outright eliminating the Electoral College, and totally abolishing the Senate filibuster the second they have a majority. To Hanson, this isn't just your standard politics, it's a literal attempt to rewrite the rules of the game.
Moving right along to Pillar 2, the modern Jacobin left, and a pretty intense historical analogy.
That idea of rewriting the rules brings us directly to Hanson's most prominent historical comparison for the modern Democratic Party. To really grasp his critique, you've got to hear this quote. He states, flat out, "I don't even think it's a Democratic Party. It's a Jacobin party." He uses this visceral comparison all the time, suggesting that the traditional liberal party of the past simply doesn't exist anymore.
This brilliantly illustrates his worldview. So, who were the French Jacobins? Think back to the French Revolution. They were the radical, often very wealthy, and ruthless faction that completely hijacked the movement. They didn't just want policy tweaks. They wanted a holistic 360-degree cultural reset. They literally renamed the days of the week, declared a year zero, and tore down statues. Hanson maps this directly onto today's progressive movement. He points to things like the 1619 Project and the toppling of historical monuments as evidence that modern progressives desire that exact same total cultural reset.
To underscore just how far he believes the party has shifted, let's contrast the platforms. Look at the 1990s Democratic platform under Bill Clinton. Back then, you had to focus on secure borders, balanced budgets, and tough on crime policies, even trying teens as adults for serious offenses. Hanson argues that if you ran on that platform today, modern progressives would literally call you a fascist. Today's platform, in his view, is dominated by open borders, anti-fossil fuel agendas, and those holistic cultural resets we were just talking about. The contrast is definitely stark.
That brings us to Pillar 3, shifting cultural norms, and what Hanson sees as the loss of decorum.
Hanson's historical lens isn't just applied to politics, he applies it heavily to everyday American life and what he perceives as a rapid societal decay. Hanson frequently brings up footage of cities like San Francisco or Los Angeles from the 1940s and 50s. Even though people were statistically poorer back then, he notes this high level of civic decorum and a well-dressed public. Compare that to his view of modern society today, which he characterizes by public slovenliness and rising crime. He uses a great, really vivid metaphor here. He says flying on an airplane today has taken on the coarse, chaotic atmosphere of a 1970s Greyhound bus. It's a perceived loss of basic, everyday respect. And Hanson argues this loss of decorum trickles all the way up into our policies and institutions, completely destroying their moral compass. He points to several really jarring anecdotes to back this up.
For instance, he cites Colorado lawmakers allegedly blocking mandatory jail time for child rapists. He points out radical protests outside a New York Children's Cancer Hospital just because a billionaire they disliked donated $400 million to it. He highlights Los Angeles teachers' union agreements that reportedly just shuffle abuse of teachers to new schools rather than actually firing them. And he even notes a New York bill that could potentially offer parole to infamous, aging serial killers like the son of Sam. For Hansen, these aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a culture that has totally lost its way.
So, we've seen how Hansen critiques domestic politics and culture. But what does this mean for the rest of the world? How does this highly critical worldview apply globally to foreign conflicts? Let's pivot and find out.
Here is Pillar 4, assessing foreign policy, specifically Iran and NATO.
What's really interesting here is how strongly Hansen pushes back against mainstream media narratives. A lot of voices in the media have called recent tensions with Iran a complete failure, some even comparing it to the Bay of Pigs. While Hansen completely rejects that. He views the current situation not as a failure but as a massive strategic success that has brought us to a critical crossroads. He suggests that, rather than full-scale ground invasions, targeted, kinetic military strikes on specific infrastructure, like the oil shipping docks at Karg Island, are the logical next step. His goal? Completely defang Iran's global threats without getting bogged down in an endless war.
When it comes down to it, his argument is really about self-reliance, which brings us to this massive number, 450 million. That is the population of the European Union and NATO countries combined. Hansen brings this up to counter the outrage over the US pulling troops out of Europe. He asks a super direct question. Why on earth should the US maintain 35,000 troops to defend Europe when they have 450 million citizens, an economy rivaling China's, and the absolute capability to fund and build their own massive militaries? He views the European reliance on US defense as a historical hangover that just needs to end.
Finally, we reach Pillar 5, the state of academia, where he argues ideology has overtaken research.
Now, Hansen has spent his entire life in the university system, but his critique of modern higher education is absolutely fierce. He doesn't mince words. He literally calls academia the easiest job in the world. No way, right? But listen to his reasoning. Academic tenure guarantees lifetime employment. Professors get 3 full months off every single summer. They get paid sabbaticals every 7th year. Hansen contrasts this directly with private sector workers, like plumbers or electricians, who have 0 of these perks and face daily rigorous accountability to actually deliver a working product. He argues this insulated environment breeds an incredible disconnect from reality.
And what is the result of that disconnect? Hansen believes academic literature repeatedly falls victim to the toxic ideologies of its specific era, which renders a lot of the research totally worthless to future generations. Let's walk through how he sees this evolving. He notes that in the 1920s, classical research was highly valued. But flip to the 1930s, and if you read German classics research, it was fundamentally tainted by Nazi racial ideology. Jump to the 1990s, and he argues academia was swallowed whole by convoluted, meaningless postmodernism. And today, in the 2020s, he asserts that rigorous research has been entirely replaced by a singular ideological focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So, the crucial point is, why does this matter to you and me? Hansen puts it bluntly. Every bad idea starts in the faculty lounge, and from the faculty lounge to the American popular culture is about 2 years. His warning is loud and clear. The insulated, ideological theories concocted in universities don't stay there. They inevitably leak out and infect the mainstream culture at lightning speed.
Throughout this explainer, we've mapped out Victor Davis Hansen's incredibly dense worldview, from shifting demographics and the Jacobin left to foreign policy and the ideological capture of academia. Hansen himself quotes the ancient poet Horace, worrying that we might just be a declining generation producing an even worse one. Which leaves us with a final, provocative question. Are we a generation destined to produce a generation worse than ourselves, or is there still time for a massive cultural course correction? It's a heavy thought, but understanding these deep structural critiques is the very first step in figuring out the answer. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.